Mannering House. Mannering House loomed above us. The four-story building must have been decadent at one time, but half a century of neglect had left it dilapidated and crumbling. Someone had nailed weather-stained wood over the lower windows, and the porch seemed to sag into the moonlit, overgrown lawn. My eyes were drawn to the highest room, the attic, where a curtain fluttered in the open window. I glanced at my three companions. Sanjeet had his arm around Tara's shoulders, while Joseph swung his torch in erratic arcs as he led us up the dirt path towards the house. "We could go to a movie instead," Tara said, unable to keep the frightened squeak out of her voice. "I hear the theater is delightfully ghost-free." "Relax," Joseph drawled, extending the last syllable as he jogged up the porch's steps. "This'll only take a minute." The door's locks had been broken years ago, probably by looters or curious teenagers like us, and the carved wood slab drew open with a low groan. Sanjeet hesitated on the threshold. "Someone probably owns this place." Joseph gave his friend's shoulder a light punch, then stepped into the vast, shadowed entryway. "Shush, no one cares." The bare rooms were dim and musty. I glanced to the right, into the living room, where knives of moonlight speared through gaps in the window's boards. "I hate this place," Tara whispered. "Me too." I wrapped my arms around my torso as I reluctantly followed my companions deeper into the building. "You guys know the story, right?" Joseph asked, beckoning us towards the stairs. His delighted eyes landed on Sanjeet, who sighed. "You know, I only moved here last year." "Go on, then, tell me." Joseph beamed and began to jog up the narrow stairway, which creaked under his weight. "Well, this place used to belong to the Mannering family. They were a pretty big clan in the 1800s, but most of them died at the turn of the century." He raised his eyebrows. "Some people say they were cursed." "Some people," was Joseph, for the purpose of adding atmosphere. I rolled my eyes, but no one noticed in the dark. When the 30s rolled around, it was just Mr. Mannering, his 3 sons, and 1 daughter, Ruth. When the war hit, all 4 men were conscripted. Mr. Mannering came back. His sons didn't. Dark patches on the stairwell's walls showed where family portraits had once hung. I shuddered as I passed them. "The war made him crazy," Joseph said, lowering his voice. We reached the landing and turned to follow the stairs to the 3rd floor. I glanced down the hallway behind us. The doors were open, and the room's furniture decaying. He locked Ruth up. Wouldn't let her go anywhere. Wanted to keep her safe, you know. Only problem was, she'd fallen for the vicar's son, Mason, while her dad was away. A spider spun down on its thread to hover in front of my face. I gasped, and Tara swung around. "What was that?" "Just a spider," I muttered, skirting it. Sanjeet squeezed his girlfriend's hand. "Don't be frightened." Joseph coughed to bring the attention back to himself. "Remember how I said the dad was crazy? He really didn't want his daughter to leave. He forbade Mason from visiting, but the boy came during the dark of night, climbed the tree behind the house, and proposed to Ruth through her window. They made plans to elope the following night. But her dad found out, and he went ballistic. We'd reached the top of the stairs, and faced a ladder that led to the final room, the attic. Tara looked terrified, but she climbed the ladder when Jason waved her up. Sanjeet and Jason followed, with me coming last. Cobwebs hung from the angled roof like old lace. The window facing the driveway was to my left, its curtains fluttered in the wind. To the right was an open window overlooking an ancient elm tree. The room was bare except for a wooden chair. Dad takes an axe and drags Ruth up to this very room. When Mason climbs the tree that night, he can see them through the window. Dad bellows, "You'll never have her." Then wham, he chops his own child's head off. Sanjeet had turned a funny color. Tara nestled into his shoulder, shivering. The kid, Mason, breaks into the house. Mr. Mannering is standing over Ruth's body, laughing like the crazy man he is. Mason runs at him and pushes the both of them through the window, where they plunge to their deaths. Question. I raised my hand. How do we know what happened if everyone died? Jason ignored me. They say Ruth's ghost haunts this house. She appears on nights like tonight, ones with a full moon, to wait for her dead fiancé. Tara squirmed. I want to go home. Not yet. I haven't shown you my secret. Jason rubbed his hands together, grinning wildly. Lucy and I came up here last week for our date. Bit of privacy, you know. Sanjeet snorted. And look what we found. Jason picked up the chair and turned it around for us to see. The seat had a deep gash, and the wood was stained nearly black. I'll bet anything this is the chopping block dear old dad used to behead his daughter. I want to go home, Tara repeated, sounding as if she were about to cry. I leaned on the windowsill to get a better look at the elm tree, and the wood creaked under my hands. Tara shrieked, and even Jason jumped, then broke out into laughter. All right, all right. Let's get out of here. I watched as the three friends climbed through the hatch that led to the floor below, then I sighed and turned back to the window. My throat tightened as my fingers clutched at my blood-stained dress, and I gazed at the branch Mason had clung to the last time I'd seen him alive. Next story. Station 331. Jen snapped her helmet into place, enjoying the quiet hiss and click that told her it was locked. A lot of outpost staff complained about having to wear the thick suits during routine patrols, but Jen liked them. They made her feel secure, as though nothing could get to her. Carly locked her gloves into place. She wiggled her fingers experimentally, then shot Jen a grin through the tinted glass of her helmet. Damn, but I've been looking forward to getting out of this joint. Jen had never asked exactly what Carly had done to get herself condemned to their tiny station on Peros's second moon, and Carly hadn't volunteered the information, but it must have been bad. People didn't end up on Station 331 by accident, and out of the three of them, Carly was the least suited to endure the isolation and monotony. Jen checked her wrist controls to ensure everything was airtight. Carly was already at the door, hopping from foot to foot and swinging her arms. Come on, let's do this already. A quiet voice buzzed through the helmet speakers. Jen, I'm ready for your all clear. Jen turned towards the plexiglass window. Alessica stood behind it, leaning over the control panel, her delicate face tensed in concentration. She was the only one of their three-woman team who kept her hair long, and it fell like a sheet down one side of her thin neck to brush over the panel. All clear, Jen said, shooting her two thumbs up as added reassurance. Alessica gave Jen a small smile, then looked towards her companion. Carly, how are you doing? If I were any more ready, I'd explode. Carly swiveled in a semicircle to face the window. Her eyes were huge, and the need to be free was etched into every line of her face. There was a pause. Carly, your monitor says your helmet isn't locked properly. There was a tremor in Alessica's voice. She hated arguing with Carly, but Jen knew her too well to think she would overlook any problem she found, no matter how minor. It was both a blessing and a curse. They were sometimes stuck in the airlock for an hour or more as she troubleshot problems, but at least Jen knew she wasn't going to be sent out in substandard conditions. Jen's partner didn't share her view. Carly let out a string of swear words and kicked at the airlock doors. We've been over this before. A half dozen times. It's a problem in the feedback or whatever. I promise you, the helmet is locked. Alessica stared at the readings on the screen. Jen could see sweat beading on her face as she braced herself. I'd like to run some diagnostics on it. She trailed off at the murderous look on Carly's face. "I swear, Leslie, you delay this patrol for another minute, and I'll murder you in your sleep tonight." Alessica's face blanched, and Jen decided it was time to intervene. "That's enough, Carly. Don't make jokes like that." "Who said I was joking?" Jen held up a hand to quiet her partner, then turned to the woman behind the console. "Leslie, I'm going to override you this time. We've checked out the helmet before, and you said it was probably a feedback glitch. Besides, it's been months since we've seen anything more exciting than sludge. I doubt Carly's going to need to test her helmet seal today." Alessica gave a small nod and began pressing buttons on the console. "Prepare for gate unlock in 20 seconds. Finally, Carly groaned. Jen stepped up to join her partner beside the door. They each took one of the stingers from the rack bolted to the wall and turned them on. Stingers were their main weapon against what lived outside the station. They looked like rifles with extended barrels, but the tip was shaped into a large metal needle. The idea was to push the needle into any unwanted creatures they found on their moon and pull the trigger. The stingers released a shot of neurotoxins directly into the lifeform's body, killing it within seconds. That was one of their jobs on Station 331, keep the moon clean of hostile beings that came off comets or space debris. Some of the newer stations got more exciting infestations of aggressive creatures like Paradonas and crawling helens and had to call for backup from their ward planets, but even though Station 331 was on a remote moon near the edge of the system, the staff rarely had to deal with anything worse than poppers and sludge. "External gate unlocking," Alessica said through the helmet, and the metal doors in front of them hissed and parted. "Yes," Carly moaned as she sprinted as quickly as her bulky suit would allow onto the surface of the moon. She took 3 steps, then kicked the powdery ground, sending herself flying nearly 10 feet into the air before gliding down to land in a billow of red dust. Jen followed at a slower pace, enjoying the sensation of weightlessness from the lower gravity outside the station. The moon wasn't ugly, but it was dull. Its uneven surface was pocked after millennia of being beaten by asteroids and space rubble. Comprised of 4 small living rooms, 1 airlock and 1 control room, the station had been built into a sheltered indent. Red rock surrounded it on 3 sides, so it got only 4 hours of natural sunlight each day. Carly was sprinting ahead, stinger held in both hands, as she searched for a target to unleash her pent-up frustration on. She disappeared over the lip of a crater, and a moment later, Jen heard a sharp pop through her headset, followed by a cackle of delight. Carly had found her first victim. Jen went in the opposite direction and circled around the back of the base. Before long, she found a target of her own. A sludge was clinging to a rock formation just meters from the front door. The human-sized clump of coal-black slime undulated as its organs worked to convert the moon's minerals into nutrients. Sludges weren't dangerous, but they could be a nuisance if they got out of control. They would clog doorways, damage equipment, and, given enough time, even eat through metal. Jen forced the tip of her stinger through the sludge's leathery skin, flicked the safety lock, and pulled the trigger. The gun kicked into her shoulder as it injected its poison, and she stepped back to watch as the sludge writhed and coiled in on itself. Scientists said the sludges were no more intelligent than a plant, but Jen still hated seeing the creature thrash as its flesh bubbled and split. She stood with it until it was completely still, then she unclipped one of the hooks from her belt and snagged a corner of the sludge's frothing flesh. She dragged it back to the waste disposal unit behind their station. Low gravity had its benefits, and while she was feeding it through the slot, she heard another crack in her headset as Carly bagged her second target. "Jen, Carly," Alessica's voice said, "I'm getting a reading of a living shape by the weather vane. It looks like a sludge, but it's a big one. On it." Carly sounded breathless, but Jen couldn't tell if it was from excitement or overexertion. Jen scouted around the perimeter of the station, making sure it was clean, before widening her loop. She could hear Carly humming as she made her way to the weather vane, which was located on an outcropping a kilometer away from the base. Twice, Carly stopped to use her stinger on creatures she found along the way, and once, she swore loudly, apparently having stubbed her toe on a rock. Jen started to tune her out as she focused on her job, injecting another sludge and a couple of thick, veiny plants that were struggling to survive on the barren moon, so she almost didn't hear Carly say her name. "What's up?" Jen asked, clipping a sludge to her cable and beginning to pull it towards the waste disposal. "This thing by the weather vane, it's not a sludge. It's hell, I have no idea what this is." "Describe it," Alessica said. "It's like big. Maybe 4 times as large as I am. Black and lumpy, with red veins running all over its body." "Red veins?" Alessica asked. "Not yellow, like a creeping Helen." "No, definitely red. They're pulsing. And there are these tendril things coming out at its base. Like roots. I think they're moving, but very slowly." There was a pause, and Jen could hear Alessica typing. "I haven't heard of a creature like that," she said, "and the system isn't bringing up any matches. Should I call Peros, Jen?" Calling Peros, their ward planet, essentially meant asking for backup. Technically, that was the correct protocol for when they found an unidentifiable alien life form, but hardly any station followed it. "Ah, hell no," Carly said. "It looks harmless. It's actually managing to move less than a sludge. I'll just inject it real quick, and then we can get back to our damn jobs." Alessica's voice was tight with anxiety when she replied, "Don't proceed. You don't have clearance." She hesitated, then added, "She doesn't have clearance." "Does she, Jen?" Jen sighed. Calling Peros was a huge inconvenience for everyone involved. Support wouldn't reach them for nearly 28 hours, and if Carly was right and the life form was vegetation or low risk, they wouldn't be happy about having their time wasted. "Stay where you are, Carly. I'll come to you, and we can deal with it together." "Sure you don't want me to get it now?" "It's an ugly son of a..." "No," Jen unclipped the sludge from her belt. "Just stay put." "Fine," Carly huffed, and Jen thought she heard a relieved sigh from Alessica in the background. Jen bounded across the moon's surface, her boots kicking up puffs of dust with each step. Peros rose over the horizon to her left, and she could see one of their sister moons, 384, to the right. There wasn't any proper day or night on 331, so the moon felt perpetually suspended in twilight. The atmosphere cast a red glow over the already bronze landscape, dimming the sun's light and casting strange, leaping shadows. Jen was still a few minutes from the weather vane when she heard Carly inhale sharply. "What happened?" she asked at the same moment Alessica said, "Carly." Carly laughed. "Oh, wow. I didn't expect that. I poked it, and it started moving." "Moving?" "Yeah, these tendril vine-like things are stretching out and waving all over the place." "Are you sure we have to kill it?" "It's the most interesting thing we've had on this moon in months." Jen kicked against the ground to leap over a rocky ridge. "Damn it, Carly. Stay away from it until I get there. We don't know how dangerous it is." "Relax," Carly drawled. "It can't reach me. I don't even think it can see." She gasped sharply. Jen heard scraping and rustling, then Carly shrieked. "Carly!" Jen called. She increased her jog to a run, moving her legs as fast as the thick suit and low gravity would let her. "What happened?" "Damn it," Carly said, over more scuffling. "It's got me, Jen. I dropped my stinger, and I can't get it off." She grunted in pain, then yelled something incoherent. Fear spiked through Jen as she raced for the weather vane. She could hear Carly panting, interspersed with snapping noises. "I'm about 2 minutes away, Carly. Hang on." Then Carly's screams filled Jen's helmet, drowning her in the rawness of the other woman's terror. Jen called to her, but Carly either didn't hear or couldn't respond. She kept screaming and screaming. The shriek's pitch rose, then there was silence. "Carly?" Jen panted into the stillness. "Carly, can you hear me? Carly?" Her helmet's disconnected. Alessica's voice was thin with horror. "Audio's gone completely. Damn it." Jen couldn't move fast enough, as if she were stuck in a nightmare where no matter how hard she ran she couldn't move any closer. Then she cleared a ridge and finally saw Carly's monster. Clinging to the rocks at the base of a crater was a massive mess of black tendrils with pulsing red rivulets running down them. They were probing outwards, feeling along the ground, seeking something to grip. Jen stopped well out of their reach and started sidestepping the creature, searching for the white suit that held her partner. She couldn't see it. "Leslie, can you tell me anything? Do you have any reading on Carly?" "No," she sounded as if she were hyperventilating, but her fingers were hitting the keyboard at an incredible speed. "It sits like her helmet has been separated from the suit. I can't get any stats at all." "Okay." Jen's pulse pounded in her head as she weighed up her options. "I'm going to try to sting it. If anything goes wrong, don't come after me, but send a message to Perros immediately." Alessica made a strangled sort of noise. "Don't. Please, Jen. Please don't." The creature's limbs were tapping at the ground and seeking contact, but they seemed to be slowing their pace. "I've got to try to find Carly. Under no circumstances are you to leave the base. That's a direct order, Leslie. Do you copy?" "Copy." "Okay." Jen began sliding down the incline that led to the life form. Two of the tendrils stretched towards her, apparently sensing the motion. Jen hoped that if she could sting it and get enough neurotoxins in it to kill it, she might still be able to find Carly. She didn't want to think about the state the other woman would be in, though. The air on 331 was toxic. If she lost her helmet. One of the arms shot out at an impossible speed and snagged Jen's ankle. She gasped and tried to jump back, but the creature was too fast. Before she could understand what was happening, she was in the air, held upside down, while another tendril wrapped around her chest. She swung her stinger towards the nearest tendril. It missed its mark. A new arm came up and wrapped around Jen's helmet, blinding her. She heard cracking noises as the black pulsing limb strained to separate the helmet from its suit. Is this what it did to Carly? She could feel the creature becoming frustrated. She had only seconds before it tried a new method of killing her. She aimed blindly, felt the stinger's steel needle puncture something resistant, and pulled the trigger. A horrific wailing noise rose around her, and Jen found herself plummeting to the ground. She twisted around mid-air in time to see she was headed for a crop of jagged rock, which would certainly puncture her suit, but at the last second, one of the thrashing arms batted her aside. She skidded over a dusty patch of ground and rolled to a stop. The creature had gone wild. Its limbs waved in every direction, as though it were trying to fight an invisible attacker, and the bestial wailing noise filled her head. The arms seemed able to stretch to impossible lengths, and Jen realized she wasn't safe where she was. She began scrambling backwards, up the incline of the crater, not daring to take her eyes off the waving, slapping arms until she was over the top of the lip and running for the base. The terrible noise followed her. The poison had hurt the life form, but it wasn't dead. A single injection probably wasn't enough for a beast that size, and there was no way Jen was going back to have another go at it, especially now that she knew for certain Carly couldn't have survived. The creature had tried to pop Jen's helmet off, just as it must have done to Carly. Jen's had only stayed on because it wasn't faulty. Tears stung her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. The guilt was crushing. She'd used her power as the team leader to override Alessica when she tried to do her job, and now her partner was dead. This is what you get for cutting corners. This is what happens when you don't take your job seriously. She squinted and ran faster. All she wanted, more than anything else, was to be inside the safety of the double-walled metal station. She would never complain about how small it was again. Jen. Alessica breathed in her ear. She sounded terrified. Are you there? In her rush to get away from the monster, Jen had forgotten to tell her remaining partner that she was okay. Alessica had heard the fight, but nothing afterwards, and Jen had left her hanging in terrible suspense. I'm here, Jen said, fortifying her voice. I'm fine, and I'm coming back now. Carly isn't. Okay, was the only thing Alessica managed to say. She sobbed quietly and discreetly the entire time Jen was jogging back to base. She was young, and Jen didn't think she'd ever lost a team member before. Relief spread across Jen's chest when the hulking metal structure came into view. She approached the airlock doors and asked Alessica to open them. The girl must have been waiting with her hand poised over the button. They drew apart immediately, and Jen entered the airlock. They looked at each other through the thick plexiglass screen that separated the airlock from the control room. Alessica's face was pale and covered in tear tracks, but she kept her voice from breaking as she stepped Jen through the protocol they'd followed so often that it was like second nature. This time was different, though. This time, Jen stood alone as she waited for the chamber to be filled with breathable air, stepped out of her suit and stored her equipment. Central doors unlocking, Alessica said at last, as the metal doors separating them parted. Jen stepped into the control room, and Alessica threw herself onto Jen. Trembling, she hugged her fiercely, and Jen patted her hair until she pulled back. The girl's red eyes searched Jen's face, and for a moment, Jen was frightened Alessica would blame her, tell her it was all her fault for ignoring the warning about Carly's helmet, but instead, she said, "What do I need to do?" Ignoring the guilt and the pain had been easier when she had a purpose, so Jen latched onto Alessica's opening and led her to the command board. We need to get a message to Perros. Explain about the life form we found. Explain about Carly. Ask for assistance. They would also need to request a replacement team member, but they could do that after the creature was dealt with and Carly's death was confirmed. Jen watched over Alessica's shoulder as she typed the message. Because of the location of their outpost, communication with Perros was difficult. Their ward planet would receive the message, but it wasn't likely they would send a reply. Any discussions would have to wait until the backup arrived. Sent. Alessica swiveled in her chair to look up at her leader. What else should I do? She needed work to keep her mind off Carly just as badly as Jen did. Unfortunately, work was one thing they were low on. The patrols usually took most of the day, so they'd finished all of their regular chores that morning. Jen opened her mouth to suggest they go over inventory again, but a sharp noise interrupted her. They both jumped and looked through the plexiglass window into the airlock. Something large and dark was pressed against the outside door. It's the monster from the weather vane. It's followed me back to base, Jen thought with a spike of panic, but as the shape moved and she realized what it really was, she somehow felt even more horrified. Carly! Alessica shrieked. Their missing team member stood outside the base. She wasn't wearing a helmet, and her crop of curly black hair was stuck to her forehead with sweat. Her dark eyes bored into them intently, desperately, as she banged a fist on the door. Alessica slammed her hand on the button that opened the airlock, and Carly stumbled inside. Jen stared at her, shocked that she had survived the unbreathable air long enough to get back to base, let alone live through having her helmet ripped off. Alessica was talking rapidly over the speaker as she changed the settings on her control panel. Hang on, Carly. I'm depressurizing the airlock, filtering in oxygen, stabilizing the seal. Just a moment, and we'll have you back in the base. Jen couldn't take her eyes off Carly as the woman leaned against one of the walls, panting and shivering. It seemed incredible that she could have made it back. More than incredible, actually. Impossible. Carly? Jen asked. Are you hurt? Carly was unzipping what remained of her thick suit. Jen saw tears in it. One arm had been shredded completely, and Jen thought she saw a splash of red on the inside as Carly shimmied out of it. A few bruises, she said, flashing them a shaky smile, but I'm alive and in one piece, so I guess I can't complain. Thank goodness, Alessica said. She was adjusting the levels in the airlock to filter out the planet's toxic air before she opened two doors to their base. Yeah, I thought that for a moment, too, Carly said. I heard you come for me, Jen, but it had me pinned, and I couldn't help. I'm glad you got away okay. Me, too, Jen said automatically, raking the woman over with her eyes. She looked fine, completely fine, and that terrified her. It's dead, by the way. Carly took one of the towels from the storage closet and rubbed at her sweaty face. The monster. Life form. Thing. Once you stung it, it let me go, and I was able to get my own stinger and finish it off. I see. Alessica looked ready to cry again, but a wide smile spread over her face. Okay, Carly, central doors unlocking. Wait. Jen grabbed Alessica's wrist to stop her from opening the metal doors that separated them from Carly. The girl blinked up at her in confusion. Did I do something wrong? No. Carly, I'm sorry about this, but you need to stay in the airlock. Quarantine. Carly's jaw dropped. She walked towards the plexiglass window. Is this a joke? Because it's really sucky timing. I want a shower, damn it. I'm sorry, Carly, but you were exposed to that thing. We don't know what it was or if it infected you with anything. You need to stay in there until the team from Peros arrives. Carly swore at her. This is ridiculous. Let me back in, Jen. Surely she's fine, Alessica said, offering a weak smile. Jen let go of her wrist. We can't take that chance. It's only 28 hours, Carly, then we can decontaminate and release you. Carly stared pure hatred at her leader, and Jen felt her resolve slipping. Maybe I am being overcautious. We were told the air was poisonous, but not how poisonous. Maybe someone could survive in it for short amounts of time. Maybe it isn't so unbelievable that she's still alive. But then Jen looked at the torn, helmetless suit crumpled on the floor, and she knew, with complete certainty, that she wanted to keep the doors closed. Alessica, Jen said, could you bring Carly some food and water? The young woman still looked shocked that they were keeping their partner inside the airlock, but she nodded and got up. Carly slouched away from the window to sit against the back wall, scowling. As Alessica's footsteps faded down the hallway, Jen said, Carly, you know why I have to do this, right? I'm your friend, she spat. We've been stuck on this forsaken lump of rock for 3 years. Don't you trust me? Not at this moment, I don't. The day passed slowly. Alessica and Jen stayed at the control panel. Carly refused to touch the bottles of water and peach-flavored slurry packets they'd cautiously tossed through the door, but sat in her corner and sulked. After trying to make small talk for a few minutes, Alessica gave up and joined them in silence. When the clock ticked over to the third quarter of the day, Jen turned to Alessica. You'd better get some rest. She looked ghastly. Her doe-like eyes were bloodshot from crying, and her face was pale, but she still smiled. I'm fine, Jen. Jen sighed. No, you really need sleep. I'll stay here with Carly. Go on. Alessica obediently got up and waved goodbye to Carly, who flashed a grin back at her. Jen waited until she heard the bedroom door close before speaking. You haven't touched your food. Not hungry. So you're going to starve yourself until we let you out? Her only reply was a very slow blink. Carly, Jen said, choosing her phrasing carefully. I don't believe you escaped from that creature. The other woman didn't say anything. I felt how strong it was. It would have torn me in half if I'd given it another minute. I'm sure it would have. Something about how she said that, almost with a hint of arrogance, made Jen pause. Carly was watching her through half-closed lids, a smirk hovering around her mouth. You don't have so much as a scratch on you. I was lucky, wasn't I? The air isn't breathable. Are you sure about that? I swallowed it. It was fine. So you think the scientists lied to us when they said it was toxic? Yes. Another slow, languid blink followed. Jen pursed her lips. She had always gotten along reasonably well with Carly, but at that moment, she would have been glad to never see the other woman again. I'm going to get some sleep, too. Do you know why I was condemned to this hellscape? Carly asked, and Jen froze halfway out of her chair. Carly's smile widened, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. I know you've seen my work history. I'm beyond overqualified for a place like this. You probably think I did something really bad to end up here, don't you? Now it was Jen's turn to play the silence game. You'd be right. Carly was speaking so quietly that Jen had difficulty hearing her. Before this, I was in charge of a mineral processing plant. Big place, dozens of people under me. There was this one conveyor belt that was designed to crush rocks into gravel, and I took a walkway above it every morning on the way to my office. She glanced to the side, and her eyes went hazy as she relived the memory. One man there, I don't remember his name, John or James or something, tried to talk to me every morning about this idea he had. A way to streamline the plant. He'd follow me from the front door until I locked myself in my office. Tried to corral me every lunchtime, too. His plans were flawed and wouldn't have worked in a million years, but no matter how often I told him that, he'd keep on, like a fly you can't catch, chasing me every morning. And eventually, I couldn't stand it any longer. Jen swore under her breath, and Carly smiled, her dark eyes flicking back to watch her companion's face with relish. You can guess what happened, can't you? He was still alive when he hit the conveyor belt, but the crushers took care of that pretty quickly. He painted the floor red. She laughed and licked her lips. I told them he slipped. No one saw me push him, so they couldn't accuse me, but they guessed. And they punished me in the most effective way they could, they sent me here. Enough, Jen said. She was shaking. Carly had never spoken like that before. She was sometimes brash, rude or reckless, but Jen had never seen such maliciousness come from her. Just thought you'd like to know, Carly said sweetly, before closing her eyes and pretending to sleep. Jen turned on her heel and marched towards the bedroom. Her head was throbbing from stress and frustration. I need some time out. A chance to center myself, away from Carly. The bedroom was dark and cool. She paused in the doorway, listening to Alessica's breathing from the bed at the back of the room, using the sound to reassure herself. She didn't bother changing, she didn't expect to sleep more than a few hours, so she crawled into her bed fully clothed. Jen didn't fall asleep for a long time. Images of the black pulsing creature kept drifting across her closed eyelids. She saw Carly, too bold for her own good, snatched into the air. Then the tendrils latched onto and tore off her faulty helmet. Jen heard her scream. She was running towards her, but the faster she tried to move, the less progress she seemed to make. A tendril forced itself into Carly's mouth, she struggled against it then bit it, and ink like blood burst from it to coat her face. A loud bang pulled Jen out of the nightmare, and she sat up in bed, drawing in thick, ragged breaths. Sweat coated her body as though she'd just finished running a marathon, and her blanket had fallen to the floor. As she sat still, trying to rein in her thundering heart, she realized something was wrong. She couldn't hear Alessica's breathing anymore. A second bang and a drawn-out scraping noise came from the main part of building. Jen launched herself to her feet. Alessica's bed was empty, the sheets pushed neatly back into place. Jen ran for the hallway. "Please no," she muttered as she ran. "Please don't be in there. Don't be in there. Please." The noise had quieted. The rooms were so still that she could have been the only living person in Station 331 as she rounded the corner and opened the door to the control room. The airlock door was open, and Alessica was inside, slumped on the ground with her back to Jen, while Carly knelt in front of her. Jen froze as Carly looked up, a wide, unnatural smile stretched across her face. Their gazes met for a second before Carly's eyes flicked to the open door. They moved at the same time. Carly dashed towards freedom, and Jen lunged for the control panel. Jen was a second faster, her hand hit the flashing red button, and the airlock doors slid closed just in time for Carly to hit them. "Damn it, Jen," she yelled. Jen pulled back from the panel, feeling terror and nausea rush through her. Alessica sat crumpled on the ground, looking like a doll that had been propped up into an imitation of a sitting pose. "What did you do to her?" Jen called. Her mind raced, fighting to think of a way to get the girl out, desperately hoping she wasn't too late. "She's fine, Jen," Carly said. She'd reverted to a complacent drawl as she paced back into view. "Aren't you, Leslie?" As if on cue, Alessica's body jerked. Slowly, like a puppet being pulled by strings, she began to twitch herself upright. It looked so unnatural that Jen wanted to scream. "Leslie?" Jen asked as the girl rotated to face the window. Alessica's face was slack, and her eyes were blank as she stared at a space somewhere behind Jen's shoulder. Then she blinked, and her whole body shuddered. Her hands twitched up, her neck straightened, her back aligned itself, and a look of awareness returned to her face. "Jen!" She clasped her hands in front of her chest, blinking quickly and giving the worried look she wore whenever she thought she was in trouble. "I'm sorry, Jen. I opened the door to give her some food, and we sat down to talk. I must have fallen asleep, and, did you lock the doors?" "Yes," Jen's lips moved to say, but no noise escaped her. Alessica looked normal again. Completely normal. Yet Jen couldn't erase the memory of her body, crumpled on the ground, as if the life had been sucked out of her. "You can let me out now," Alessica said, hurrying to the plexiglass window and giving Jen a sweet, apologetic smile as she pressed her hand to it. "I'm really sorry. I know I should have asked you before going in, but she said she was hungry, and I'm so sorry. Please let me out." "No," Jen wanted to cry as she said the words. "You're in quarantine now, too." Something flashed over Alessica's face, anger or maybe resentment, and was covered over so quickly that Jen doubted she'd seen anything. "Oh, Jen," the girl said, her voice a tremulous whisper, "please don't be mad at me. I was just trying to do the right thing." Jen turned away from the console so Alessica wouldn't see how badly her words had cut. On the day Alessica had arrived on Station 331 to complete their three-woman team, Jen had realized the girl was too gentle and too young for a job that would entail years of isolation. As Alessica examined the console station she would be in charge of, Jen had watched the woman's hands flutter above the buttons with the anxious motions of someone who'd never been outside a simulation room before. She'd made up her mind to watch over her newest ward carefully. She'd told herself she could shelter her, protect her, and guide her until her contract was up. Then she could usher her into an easier, more enjoyable job on Perros. She'd failed. Whatever had happened to Carly had taken over Alessica, and Jen hadn't been able to stop it. Jen. Alessica called, and she sounded so much like herself that it was agony for Jen to leave the doors closed. I'm sorry, Jen. I didn't mean to upset you. Jen grimaced, then turned back to the window. Alessica stared back, her smile apologetic, her doe eyes begging for forgiveness. Carly was near the back of the room, standing beside the shelves holding the equipment. She kept her eyes averted, seemingly trying to blend into the background, almost as though she hoped Jen would forget she was there. Jen couldn't let Alessica out, but she didn't want to leave her alone, either. She sat in front of the console, ignoring the girl's curious gaze, and turned off the intercom. If she couldn't hear her, she wouldn't be so tempted. As soon as she saw Jen wasn't going to open the doors, Alessica turned away and joined Carly near the back of the room. They sat together, Carly's arm around her friend's shoulders, in the same pose Jen had once sat with Alessica when she'd been crying from homesickness. Jen ignored them. The console recorded and stored audio for up to 48 hours. Normally, it was Alessica's job to retrieve it if they needed to check any of their patrol data, but Jen knew enough about the machine to fumble her way through it. She rewound it to a point just a few minutes before the door had been opened, and pressed play. "Hi, Leslie," Carly's tinny voice said. "Couldn't sleep?" "No, neither could I." A few minutes of silence was punctuated by rustling noises. Jen imagined Alessica sitting in front of the desk and Carly moving towards the window. "Leslie, I can trust you, can't I?" "Yeah, of course you can." She heard Carly sigh. "There's something wrong with Jen." "What? In what way?" "The creature didn't attack me, Leslie. It snagged my ankle and tripped me over, but it wasn't dangerous. It was Jen who pulled my helmet off." Alessica was silent. "I didn't want to say anything in front of her, in case it panicked her and she tried to hurt you too, but I think she wanted me to die out there. She pulled the faulty helmet off and left me to suffocate. I guess she thought the plant would be a very convenient explanation." There was a thin sound. Jen thought it must be Alessica trying not to cry. "I'm so sorry, Leslie." Carly's voice was low and anxious. "I don't know what to do. She's locked me in here to divide us. Quarantine is just an excuse. Why would I need quarantining, anyway? I'm not hurt, and I'm not sick." Alessica mumbled something Jen couldn't make out. "No. The creature was harmless. It was Jen all along. She doesn't want me working here. She wanted to get rid of me. I can prove it to you. She left a bruise on my neck. Come in, and I'll show you." Alessica mumbled again. It was a wonder Carly had been able to understand her. "No, it's okay. Just come in, and I'll show you. Then we can figure out what to do. We'll find a way to help Jen, I promise, but we'll need to work together. We'll need to be able to trust each other. You do trust me, don't you, Leslie?" The squeak of a chair being vacated was followed by the slick whoosh of doors being opened, silence for a moment, then the loud bang that had broken through Jen's sleep. She heard a whimper, followed by another bang and a dragging sound. Then footsteps, her footsteps, raced into the console room. Jen turned off the recording. She'd been so engrossed in it that she hadn't noticed Alessica and Carly had moved. They stood in front of the window, equally calm faces holding tranquil eyes that stared down at her. Carly raised her hand and rapped on the plexiglass. Knowing what she wanted, Jen turned on the intercom with trembling fingers. "You don't remember, do you, Jen?" Carly asked. "What?" Her mouth was dry. Their stares were almost hypnotic. "You don't remember attacking me?" "Because I didn't. The plant was harmless. It tangled around my legs, and while I was trying to pull myself free, you grabbed me from behind. I screamed, and you pulled my helmet off, disconnecting the audio so I couldn't get any word back to Leslie. No. Jen shouted, launching herself out of the chair to face them. That's a lie. You've been acting strange for weeks, Alessica murmured. I confronted you about it yesterday. Don't you remember? You've been mumbling in your sleep and refusing to talk to us. That's not true, Jen stammered. Alessica's gaze held her, mesmerizing her. It is true, Carly continued. We've been so worried about you, Jen. It's this place. This station. It's too small and too remote for someone as strong as you. You've been gradually losing your mind for months. No, yes, Alessica said. And you finally snapped yesterday. You knew how wrong it was, how terrible what you were doing was, so your mind built a fantasy. A fantasy about a monster that tried to kill Carly, but it was you all along. Jen pressed a hand to her cheek and found it was wet. Her body was shivering. They were lying to her, she knew, trying to chip away at her resolve and make her doubt herself. Do you remember what you did to be sent to this station? Carly asked. Her lids were half closed, and her voice was a low, comforting murmur. Do you remember? I talked back to a superior. No, Jen, you tried to strangle your superior. You always protested your innocence. Your mind washed it over. You couldn't stand to think of yourself as a killer. No, what will the relief unit from Peros think when they arrive and find you've locked both of your team members in a room with no food or water? But I haven't, Jen stammered. We gave you food. Carly waved her hand at the room. No, you didn't. It's just your mind telling you that you did. Jen stared at the ground, the shelves, and the boxes, trying to find the packets of food and bottles of water she'd passed through the door. We did give Carly food, didn't we? You see. Carly said, her voice a sweet song in Jen's ears, her eyes drawing the other woman back to drown in them. You can't trust your mind. But you can trust us. We want to help you, Jen. Let us out before the relief team arrives, and we can protect you, look after you, make sure no one hurts you. Let us help, Alessica whispered. She was standing so close to the glass that her breath fogged it. We want to help you. It's okay, Jen. Just open the doors. Open them, Jen. It's okay. You can trust us. Jen found her hand hovering over the red button that would unseal the airlock. Her body was shaking, and her head was foggy. Tears dripped off her chin as she stared at her teammates, the two people she'd relied on, cared for, and watched over for nearly 3 years. They smiled at her so warmly and so kindly that she knew denying them would be insanity. Her hand pressed the button. The doors drew open with a gentle whoosh, and it felt good to give in, to stop resisting, and to stop fighting her friends. That's what they were, friends. They walked through the doorway, came to her with open arms, and embraced her. The women held her still as she cried, stroked her hair, and told her she'd done the right thing. Then Jen looked at Alessica and saw a hairline fracture running down from her scalp, between her eyes, down her nose, and over her lips, chin, and neck before disappearing behind her shirt's collar. Jen frowned at it, confused and mesmerized. It began to part, splitting open, peeling the girl's smiling face back to show the pulsing, black mass inside her. Jen tried to pull away, but they held her firmly. She looked at Carly and saw she'd mimicked her partner. Her skin was coiling back in on itself as the black tendrils reached out of their shell, tasting the air, and stretching towards Jen's face. Jen stood in front of her station, suited up to protect against the toxic air, as she watched the ship from Peros land. It kicked up huge clouds of red soil as it touched down, and even though she was wearing a helmet, she raised her arm reflexively to shield her face. The ship's doors opened, and 3 suited figures jumped out. Jen waved them over and led them into the airlock. As soon as breathable oxygen had replaced the toxic air, they unlocked their suits. "Thanks so much for coming," Jen said as soon as her helmet was off. "That's our job," the team's leader, a tall and wiry man, said. "What's the problem?" Jen watched as they unsuited. Their team was comprised of 2 men and a woman. They all looked tough and capable, exactly what she needed. "Long story," she said as they hung up their suits, "but it's been pretty crazy down here. Come in, and I'll explain everything." The doors slid open, and they entered the main part of the station. Jen turned to smile at the assistance team as Alessica and Carly, as quiet as shadows, appeared behind them. Jen didn't need to give any signal, they all knew what needed to be done. "Have you ever heard of body snatchers?" she asked, beaming at the 3 newest additions to their small colony as her sisters shed their human skins.